Greetings, family. This is Dia Nunez with the H20 Network, sitting with my elder, Oba Ernesto Pichardo, who is also the founder of CLBA, Church of the Lukumi Babaluaye. And I promised you all that, we got such good reception from the last video call that we did. Me and Oba on the Underwire have been talking about doing a question and answer session. So these would be like up to 30 minutes, maybe a little less, but people will be able to send their questions in, which we have gotten, and Oba's going to answer questions. So this is our first video call of the H20 Network, and sitting down with Oba Ernesto Pichardo. Hi, Oba.
Blessings, how are you?
I'm doing good, Bendition. Oba, I'm excited to do this. I like being on video and seeing your face.
Yeah, it's better, I guess. At least this one, we know what we're up to behind the camera.
Indeed. So we're going to go ahead with our first two questions. The first question I have is from Marie. She asks, is there anything, she's into Eastern tradition, however, she wants to know if there's anything such as the Kama Sutra in reference to Lukumi. Do we deal in that genre? It is the essence of creation, and of course, people always talk about Oshun and Chango and these archetypes. So what's going on, Oba?
Well, that's a heck of a question to start with.
It is. I love it. I love it.
You love it, huh?
I do.
Well, I would say to you that many people that begin to read the Kama Sutra and what have you, depending what books they're reading or what have you, I would say fall into the initial impression that this is all about positions, sexual positions. I would say, of course, they need to research that because it's much more. Its roots really are based on energy, and there's a spiritual context to the whole thing.
Indeed.
And so when I hear a question like this, the starting point for us to explain ourselves would be we have to look at what is our concept of the spiritual and then kind of contextualize it in this notion or this idea, because there isn't we don't have a book or some kind of written methodology to these things that people can purchase and read through and learn about it. So I'll talk a little bit about it.
Well, Oba, before you go on,
we have it from the oral tradition.
The reason why I did this question first, and I love this question, is because taking your teachings and sitting with you and you talk about Maslow's hierarchy of needs,
yes.
Human connection and intimacy and love is a human need. It's on the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And this is why people come and they get readings and so on and so forth. So on the surface layer, it may seem like, oh my God, what kind of question is that? But it's a very deep question.
It is.
And everyone talks about, when you talk to priests, I want to be a child of Oshun or Chango. Like we have these surface layer realities and essences with the omnipoignant of what we call Oshun and Chango. But there's a deeper Lukumi metaphysical connection towards sexuality and the essence of creation. I think it's a very poignant question. So I'm glad that Marie asked this question.
Indeed. So like I was saying, we don't have it. What we have is oral knowledge of how it can be explained in the context of our religious system. We don't have some written document like the Kama Sutra is written, right? So there isn't that kind of reference that people can go to. We start from really from the spiritual. That's where it starts for us. So in contrast, if people want to read and get themselves well versed on Kama Sutra, what do? They just go and buy his book and start going through it, right? For us, that's going at it backwards. By that I mean, if you buy the book and you start reading Kama Sutra, then and you're looking at the graphics and what have you, it moves you through the material path of understanding in physical terms what they're talking about, right? This is not how in our tradition we view sensuality, relationships, love making, procreation, any of that. We start from not from the physical, we start from the spiritual. For us, everything starts at the spiritual, and then it manifests itself in the physical. So we look at it the other way around, right?
Indeed.
That's how we approach it. For those in our faith and those that may be listening and are not members of our faith, like the person who posed the question, we look at deities is one of the things that we look at. Which deities in our pantheon of worship are associated, if you will, with the notion or the idea of sensuality and lovemaking. In those archetypes, for the female, from a gender standpoint, the default that people always point to is Oshun. So when we mention the word sensuality, lovemaking, intimacy, those kinds of things, everyone is going to be quickly to say Oshun.
Indeed.
And then what happens with that is that they don't think through what we're talking about. In other words, it's almost like if Oshun was the default for it, for the topic, and then it's not connected to anything else. And I would say to you that that would not be a correct interpretation. As a default, we can say Oshun, and for that I mean certain types or archetypes, or not archetypes, but Oshun being an archetype. Oshun has many types. And within those many types, not all of them are attributed with the idea of sensuality and intimacy and lovemaking and all this other stuff. Not all of them. So when we look deeper into that, we realize that it's just a default interpretation with many other possibilities and variables. On the male side, male gender, in Lukumi, we always point to Chango as being Oshun's counterpart when it comes to this topic. So as you can see, there's a binary understanding of lovemaking, intimacy, and those kinds of issues. So it's not one-sided, as one might think in Lukumi, right? Everything in Lukumi is binary. So even this question is binary. That's important to note.
It is.
And for two things to take place, there has to be one that makes the connection. That through the one, the other two then trigger their emotions, et cetera, and then things begin to unfold. So it's not even locked in, if you will, in the concept of two, right? The idea of a yin or a yang, now that we're talking about Eastern systems. There has to be something that triggers that yin and yang. There is motion. So before any one of these sides, male or female, connect to each other, some kind of energy, some kind of motion needs to take place that awakens, that triggers, whether it is directly on one gender or the other, until both make a connection. The ability for that to take place, we interpret that within the archetype Eshu and Elegba, which is interesting because the default understanding of that principle or those archetypes of Eshu Elegba are rarely, in the default understanding of most people, rarely associated with sensuality and intimacy and lovemaking and childbearing and pregnancies and all of these kinds of things.
Well, ironically, the African depiction, and I think I've actually talked about this on the H20 Network, is a legba with an erect penis, and there's a reason for that.
Yeah, it is a phallic symbol.
It's a phallic symbol, and there's a reason for that.
And yes. In fact, his dance wand is a penis, in Africa. The dance wand with the penis was basically abolished in the diaspora during slavery, as viewed as offensive, and therefore that disappeared. What happens here is that not only Elegba is associated with the phallic symbol, but so is the divinity that we call Orisha Oko. In fact, the central object or symbol representing that deity is a phallic symbol among the Yorubas, which was also, again, abolished during colonialism in the diaspora as offensive. So those are some of the little details and symbolism that we've lost in the transition to the New World. The reason for losing it basically is the cultural issues that we all know. What's interesting here is that Elegba is the one that's associated directly with, in terms of the phallic symbol, is the one that's associated directly with the human and animal as well. Those triggers. For example, what takes place when a female is just, let's say, sitting in a mall somewhere, in a store somewhere. She's not thinking about sensuality. She's not thinking about anything related to sex whatsoever. Looking at the mall, right? Window shopping. Totally distracted. But then all of a sudden, she visualizes a man. Upon sight, there's this trigger in one's own brain that connects visually and sends out a pleasant signal in our minds. That is the starting point of instant, if you will, attraction to the man they're viewing at the moment. In order for that to occur, that trigger upon sight, it is that the female is recognizing whatever that male is projecting, right? So we have, again, that binary is taking place. For that to connect in such positive terms, it is Eshu, Elegba. It is their domains. They are the ones in charge of motion. That which travels, the energy that travels from point A to point B and connects, is within the domain of Eshu and Elegba, not some other deity, not some other Orisha. That is the first one to act. That is the first thing that takes place. So we say that every one of us, within us, we have a piece of that which is Elegba or Eshu within us. So the starting point of this conversation is not even Oshun or Chango for that matter.
That's why I'm smiling, because everybody's like, oh, I have to go to Oshun, I have to go to Chango. And you're like, well, you're forgetting the little man, the gatekeeper. He's the gatekeeper to everything.
That's right. Unless Elegba carries that energy, unless Elegba carries that and puts it into motion and connects and makes the connection, the others are not capable of acting. It's that simple from a metaphysical standpoint. All right. And when we speak of Eshu and Elegba as two different archetypes with many types within them, we find that there's an interesting situation there, because when we start again analyzing the types, we find that some are or could be considered to be asexual, while others are more on the sexual, and there are others, and when we speak of sexuality within the scope of Eshu Elegba archetypes, we have to keep in mind that duality of Eshu and Elegba in the context of sexuality of the question, what we're talking about is not what we in society may consider to be normal, healthy, starting up a relationship, as it increases and becomes more bonding, et cetera, even to the actual intercourse, what we can consider in society as healthy and a sense of normalcy in sexual behavior, that part of the conversation goes to the Elegba archetype. Now, when we're engaging in sexuality, in what we in society point to as sexual deviancy, meaning extremes that become unhealthy, that belongs in the Eshu archetype, not the Elegba. So, find that interesting?
I do, because people don't understand. Well, people do understand, but you can't have Elegba without Eshu and Eshu without Elegba. If you just have one archetypal omnipotent presence, it could literally, they're both the gatekeepers. You have to have two sides of the coin. If you
they're one and the same. Right.
They're one and the same.
Like saying, they're like saying, they're one and the same. However, there's a split.
There is a split. So if you just have one, it becomes. And then the split is where then you have these subcategories of issues that we discussed, isn't it? Indeed.
Right. It's a construct that just divides and divides and divides and divides itself on both sides, depending on the topic. Right?
Indeed.
So it's a way of categorizing this and subcategorizing the topic. That's the structure of how we view this. So, when we're dealing with Eshu, let me give you a couple examples. That's when we're saying, okay, the split occurs between Eshu and Elegba as soon as there's alcohol or drugs involved. As soon as that becomes an extreme, right? Now, as long as you're just having a social cocktail or something like that with this person, where you're getting a little buzz, but we're not losing control of ourselves, and we're just going through a normal process. That is still within that domain that we're talking about, calling Elegba as a particular, archetype A, right? Examples of archetype B, meaning Eshu, then would be when you're going to an adult bar somewhere, a nude bar, when you're going to similar places depending on the society that we're in. When you're walking into houses of prostitution, when you're picking up a hooker in the street, that already is a trigger that creates that divide in the conversation. Now you're walking in the steps of the archetype Eshu right from inception, isn't it? So if you're into bondage, if you're into all this other stuff that's out there that I can't even keep track of them anymore, because I'm too old to keep track of that stuff already. It's too much. Okay? All this S&M stuff and all these things, I don't know where we're going with these. But all of that really is the Eshu realm.
Well, the reason why I bring it up, Oba, is because this is important when it comes to the Kama Sutra, if you will, of relationship. Because people are living an Eshu-like relationship with their partners, and they don't even know it. Or
right.
They're living an Elegba type of metaphysical energy with their partners. You
right.
see, so
right.
there's a split off, especially when you talk about the Kama Sutra of us meeting our partners or meeting people that they have intimate relationships. They're acting out these apatakis with these two energies, and then you have this split off, but they're not really recognizing what that is. So this is why I brought this up, because I think this is very important and poignant.
Right. Before we have anything concrete to say about, okay, now we've entered the domain of Oshun in terms of gender, female, or we've entered the domain of Chango as the male, regarding attraction and sexuality and sensuality and all this stuff. Before that happens, what causes that connection and triggers it, ignites it, gets it going, puts it in motion, it's either Eshu or Elegba. It starts there. And one thing we can remind our folks, and that is, do we not say in our religious system that everything begins with Elegba?
Yes, we
do. So why would it not begin? Why would sensuality, why would the idea of attraction, which is where things begin pretty much, that's the beginning. And if it's the beginning, that which is first is Elegba or Eshu. It is not the tail end of it or anything in between.
Indeed. And Oba, see, this is funny. We can never I don't know why we try to front like we're going to do like 15 or 30 minutes. We're at the 47-minute mark.
We're at 40 minutes already?
We're at 47 minutes. So what we're going to...
That's terrible.
I know, right? I know, family. You know how me and Oba get when we're together.
All right, well, then let's leave it with answering this one question, and then we'll do another one answering some other questions.
Indeed, family. So this is our first video question. Me, Dia Nunez of the H20 Network, sitting with my elder, Oba Ernesto Pichado, who is the co-founder of CLBA, Church of the Lucumi, Babaluaye, an elder priest of Chango, an elder of the community at large, answering your questions. Thank you for hanging out with us with our first video, and stay tuned for our next video. Bye-bye. Sending you a lot of love, family.